Well. And so for some of us, we may be going through more of a dry season. For others, we can just reach out and touch Jesus and it all feels wonderful. And again, these are things are normal. Right at the beginning in Genesis, you have Adam and Eve in the garden. And then it goes right through to Revelation, where there is the wedding of the Lamb. There's all the imagery about God being a husband to Israel. In the New Testament, Jesus coming for his bride. And also all the imagery about our marriage, every single marriage in this room, in some way being a representation of God's relationship with us and with the church. And there's loads of interesting verses in the wisdom literature. Mike and Lynn already talked about Ecclesiastes, they mentioned some bits from Proverbs, and there's lots in there as well about marriage. And also the intimacy, right in the middle of the Bible, that incredible book of the Song of Songs. And we want to begin by reading you a verse from Ecclesiastes. And this is a verse that's often read at weddings. Here we go. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 9. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their work. If they fall down, they can help each other up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can 1 keep warm alone? Though 1 may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. And then this wonderful line, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. That sense that together we're like two bits of string, and then we have that central bit of string, which is our relationship with God, and they're twisted together. And they are much, much stronger together than apart. Now, much of what we're going to say now is assuming that both husband and wife are followers of Jesus. And we don't want to assume that that's the case, but we're quite likely that you will know people where just one husband or the wife It's the only one in a marriage that has a faith. And so just a couple of things on that before we look at how together we can really forge that strong relationship with God. So first of all, don't let's ever underestimate the power of a life lived for God. In the book of Peter, 1 Peter, it says, it's talking about wives and husbands who aren't believers. And it says, I'm just switching mics. It says that the husbands will be won over without words, by the behaviour of their wives. So it's our witness in the home. Secondly, let's watch out for the qualities of the kingdom that we see in people's lives. They may not know the Lord themselves, but we have someone in our home group in our church, and her husband doesn't come to church. And she was feeling really sad about that the other day. She says he feels on his own, he feels an outsider in church. And I was talking to him about the qualities, talking to her about the qualities in this guy's life. I said, is he kind? Yes, he's kind. Is he generous? Yes, he's generous. Does he care for the poor? Is he out every Saturday morning doing the soup run? Well, he may not be there yet, but he's really very near and getting near. And so let's watch out for those qualities that delight the heart of God, not put people in a sort of prodigal box over there. And then thirdly, if there are couples in that situation, let's not allow this issue to come between us. Let's never underestimate the power of prayer. God wants us to come to know him more than we want our husband or wife to. Richard wasn't a Christian when we first met. My daughter is married to a lovely Christian guy called Will, but he didn't know the Lord when they first met. So we can be praying, and that really undergirds all these things. So there are no guarantees. But when Richard became a Christian, I thought everything would be fine. This will now be the perfect marriage. If we both know Jesus, then nothing else can come between us. Nothing else can go wrong. Well, how wrong I was.
This is something that is so obvious, and yet we often don't recognise it during that first flush of being in love together. The idea that actually each of us could be different. We can be different in many ways. We can be different because of the experiences we've had growing up in the families that we have. We can be different because of our personalities. We can be different because of our experiences. And obviously, we're going to more than likely be different about our approach to our faith. Even if we've grown up in the same church with the same experiences there, we will still have fundamental differences that start to come to the fore. Building a moral marriage with God at the centre is all about together learning to walk with him. Not pursuing our individual life with him on our own, but learning to walk together. One of the reasons it can be difficult is that when there are two of you together, we're going to be going through different seasons in our lives. Sometimes one of us will be really rushing ahead, exploring all sorts of things to do with our faith, and the other one may be battling through some very mundane things. In our world, it could be with me, with my business. Maybe it's going really well, so I'm really on fire for things, or maybe it's a bit tough, and then I'm sort of dragging my feet a bit. Maybe for Catherine, it's because she's been involved with someone else in a group, and they're really pushing each other on. It may be because of our personalities. One of us may be introvert, one of us may be extrovert. So maybe we express our faith in different ways. Maybe we like the idea, if we're more introverted, in spending time alone, on seeking the Lord through quiet study and contemplation. Maybe if we're extrovert, we prefer to be in with the crowd, having praise and celebration and loud sermons and joining in all the excitement of that. Maybe it's because we've got different expectations of what God should be doing in our lives. Maybe we're the sort of personality who says that, what will be, will be. Maybe others think that you should be moving things forward. Catherine, as she mentioned, was a Christian when we came together, and so she had been brought up in a Christian household. And that household had shaped for her expectations of things you would do. Even just on a Sabbath day, it might be different. I hadn't had that experience. My family were not churchgoers, let alone people of faith. I had no expectations about how we should or shouldn't behave. And of course that can result in your marriage in bringing a little bit of a gap between you. The missed expectations. For Catherine, perhaps disappointment that I wasn't conforming to the standards that she had seen in her family. Perhaps for me, guilt and withdrawal because I could sense that she was disapproving of some of the things that I would see as being appropriate. It can be as mundane as playing sport on a Sunday, by the way. These aren't actually deep-rooted things. And if these issues are not dealt with by us and worked through, then they will push us away.
So if that is your situation, maybe one of you feels much more on the front foot and the other maybe slightly more on the back foot in faith. Firstly, a word to the one who is driving the agenda. Ease up. The chances are that if we're always pushing the other person, we're going to make them feel judged and we're going to make them feel guilty. We can just step back. Let's not manipulate situations. And when our husband or wife does engage and does show faith in the way that we want them to, let's encourage them, let's thank them, let's show them how much it means to us. And in that way, it prevents it becoming this issue between us.
And if maybe like I was in the early times of our marriage, you're the one on the back foot, feeling that you're getting things wrong all the time, then just show a little bit more momentum, lean in a bit more, be a little more interested in supporting and understanding, try and communicate better, try and realise the differences that are starting to impact that relationship. So we're going to now look at some very specific examples for us of how we can move God to the centre of our marriage. The first is something that Mike and Lynn referred to this morning. That is the idea of being intentional in our prayer life together. For most, praying together is not easy. It's something that we are going to struggle doing. There can be, as I said earlier, the different expectations, but there are also the fact that we are each going through those different seasons together. Perhaps when you haven't got kids, it's really easy to think you can carve out that time. Maybe with children, it's a lot more difficult. Maybe one of you works different shift patterns to the other one, perhaps working through evenings or through the nights. How do you find that intimate time together to meet in prayer? When we were first married, we knew that we should do this. It was ingrained within our church fellowship. Prayer is at the centre of everything, and we knew instinctively we should be bringing it into our marriage. And yet we found it so difficult. We found it difficult even to agree on what we should be praying about, let alone how we should be doing it. And of course, there's the potential for conflict coming out of that. And looking back, we can see, as we reflect through those years, that it was this missed expectation for each other that was at the centre of it. And so often we really didn't get our joint prayer life off the ground, unless it was focused around something we were doing in church.
And some wise words from a friend helped us with this. And they just said to us, pray little and often. I mean, I thought you had to have an hour, and we never had an hour, so we never prayed. But they just said, take a little bit of time, maybe in the morning, Mike and Lynn just mentioned, last thing at night. And this is the time to pray something for each other. This isn't about praying for the needs of the world, important as that is. And so that's what we began to do. And we began just to ask each other, what one thing can I pray for you this morning? And it would literally take, say, 5 minutes. And one thing each that we could just bless each other or pray for. Now, that's grown over the years, and now, first thing in the morning, usually I make the tea while Richard's slumbering.
Rose it twice this week.
And we read the Bible, we listen to a little devotion that we've come across, and we pray together. Now, when the kids, we have 4 children, they're grown now, but when they were little, they got up really early. And it meant that we had to get up earlier and earlier and earlier to try and find this time. But we did it. And now I think it would feel like not cleaning our teeth in the morning if we didn't spend that time praying together. It's very hard to hold a grudge against someone if you're praying with them, so it draws us closer together, it draws us to God as well. And I think I can say that it's probably the most key foundational thing in our relationship, just that little moment of praying together. And there are challenges. So I work for Care for the Family. Richard works in a law firm, a law business in Bristol, and I travel a lot. And so often we're not even in the same place. And we found then that was difficult. But Rob Parsons is the UK director of, he is the chairman of Care for the Family. And I noticed when we were on the road speaking, the first thing, we would do an evening event, the very first thing he would do when we came off the stage, he would phone his wife Diane, and they would pray together on the phone. And they would, he often, at work, we would pray walking along the road, we pray in coffee shops, we pray anywhere and everywhere, but he always prays with Diane on the phone, every morning and every evening when we're on the road. And I was hugely challenged by that, and we've tried to do that as well, with varying degrees of success. The thing is, if we can learn to pray for the small things, if we can pray for each other, those little moments in the morning, we've got it in the bank. We've got that habit in the bank for when the big things come along. And we've had quite a testing time over the last few years, over the last autumn. Richard's mother's been very ill. My mother broke her hip. My father then became ill, and then he actually died on Christmas Day. He was 100 years old and 6 months, which was amazing. But that takes its toll, and other pressures as well. But because we had that routine in place, we were able to come to the Lord together with these bigger issues as well. So what we'd love you to do now, you should all have got one of these little leaflets. I think if you're clever, after the conference, you could probably slip it into the folder actually, with Mike and Lynn's things as well. But if you have a look, there's an outline. And what we want you to do now is just to spend a couple of moments praying with each other. If it's something you are used to doing, just go for it and just pray blessing on each other. But we've got a blessing that we've got on here, and it's from Numbers. And it's the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. You could use that. You could say the Lord's Prayer. As you pray, just pray for each other now for a few minutes. And if you haven't got one of these, just put a hand up. We've got a whole load at the front, but I think you should all have one. So we'll just give you a few minutes to do that now. It's just such a precious thing. And just from here, just looking out and seeing all these couples just praying together, it's a very beautiful thing. So that's praying together. Second one
is going to be building an accountable relationship. Now, some of you may already be doing this, but this is something that we came into, almost we might say God-led, but actually we then have discovered the real benefits of this. We know within our church life how much under attack family life is and how important it is that we build a really strong marriage. Some years ago, a group of us had been on a house party. When we came back, we kept meeting as a group to pray. And then for one reason or another, we broke down into smaller groups until Catherine and I were with a couple who we would say were not our soulmates. They didn't have the same life as we had. Catherine and I both trained as lawyers, so you can probably appreciate we're people who like reason and understand structure and all that stuff. These guys had been in the arts industry. One of them the husband had a band and had toured the country. They wore funny clothes, they wore their hair up and stuff. So we ended up praying with this couple. The thing we shared was children of the same age. And gradually, as we started to meet more and more, we went on our life journeys together. I'm going back 20 years or so. We went on our life journeys together. Husband was a youth minister, and then they went off and pioneered their own church, which has grown enormously. And we have carried on meeting together every fortnight on a Tuesday evening. And we have learned to share the highs and lows of our lives together. But more importantly than that, because we have journeyed together, they have begun to understand how we behave, and we've begun to understand how they behave. And when they say, "How are you?" into your marriage, and you go, "It's fine," they know it's not true. And they begin to challenge you. And they begin to hold you to account. When we say to them, "How are you?" and one of them looks at you in a particular way, you go, "It's not true, is it? Let's talk about it." And we have a little meal together, and we pray together, and we journey together. Now, we have become the greatest of friends, but it is an unusual friendship for that. We really complement each other because they really like the structure we bring into their lives and the accountability, and we love the fact they push us outside our comfort zone with the things that they talk about and do. And sometimes the busyness of our lives pushes in on that. Catherine's away on the road somewhere, I'm away in London, they're away doing some of their work, and that Tuesday night can go missing. And once or twice we have had, particularly it's the other husband, say, guys, if we're serious about this, we've got to find the alternate time. And so we'll look for a Saturday morning breakfast or another evening where we can just fit it in. Because this is our lifeblood. And it's probably the most significant thing that we do together in nurturing our marriage in an accountable way.
I remember one occasion, relatively recently, some very good friends of ours had got in trouble in their marriage, and the guy had had an affair. And we were really hurt by this, and we were really, if I'm honest, I was really mad with him. And we were talking about it over the meal together, and I was saying, I can't believe that this couple, that this happened, that this guy did this, and I was having a bit of a rant about it. And then Silas, our friend, leant across the table and he said, Catherine, how many of the things that you are saying about this couple do you do or don't do? How many boundaries have you put in place that you're saying they haven't put in place? And it was a sobering moment. Because we thought, my goodness, this could be us. It could so easily be any of us, if I'm honest. And so it's that kind of accountability. But we have fun together, we laugh together, it's not all deep and serious, and it's really very straightforward. We have some pasta, we have a laugh, we sometimes cry, and we pray. But it's the regularity of it that has woven itself into our relationship. They've been there for us, and we've been there for them.
So people come along and they say to us when we talk about this at conferences, well, that's amazing, but how do you go about doing it? And that's a great question. And there's a simple answer. Ask someone. It's as simple as that. Find someone. Don't go looking for your best friend, because they may not challenge you. That's one caution I'd put in. They might do, you might feel that, but of course the start of this isn't about the friendship, because you have to be held accountable. That person has to say things to you, that other couple say things to you that you might find a little bit tough to answer. So we didn't know Annie and Silas when we started off on that journey, but as Catherine said, we've become great friends. But we're accountable to each other, and that's what comes first. And we make ourselves and choose to make ourselves accountable in that relationship. So if you're doing it now, brilliant, well done. Hopefully you found it a little bit more quickly than we did. But if you haven't started it, we'd encourage you to start to look for someone else to journey with. The third thing we want to talk about is serving together. As we've said, we'll each be in different seasons, we'll each have different things going on, we'll each have different capacities. Sometimes different things come across us that cause problems with that. Maybe it's our health, maybe it's other pressures coming around. But this is something that we've learned from very early days. In fact, in one sense, we were not given a choice. I joined the church where Catherine was worshipping as we got engaged, and then when we got married, 2 weeks before we got married, the vicar said, will you take over leading the youth group? As I said, Catherine came from a church background. She knew what a youth group was. I was struggling to understand what he was talking about. I thought it was Hebrew or Greek or something. And we just said, yeah, sure, because people asked us to do leadership things. What we discovered was that a group of well-meaning people in the church came alongside us and said, you should not be doing this so early in your marriage. They quoted Old Testament scripture about the man not going to serve in battle for the first 12 months of marriage. Then we had other people come alongside us saying, this will be foundational for your relationship. It'll test you, but you will be doing something together. And actually, as we look back, that is the truth. In learning to serve together, you're journeying together. And it's about finding the work that you both can do. So I might have loved the youth work, Catherine may have hated it, then it wouldn't have been any good. We both love doing it. And we've seen things on our journey through our church life, serving God, where we know that one of us is keener on it than the other, and then we have to adjust what we're doing. So we need to look at our gifting within this and say, what can we do together? You may have the gift of hospitality, one of you, or you may both have the gift of hospitality. If only one of you's got it, question whether hosting something like a home group or something is the right way forward, because it might be pushing you apart. But if you've both got it, then you won't find that difficult at all. exactly what we do, we think in this isn't important. It is that fact that you're doing it together, that you're recognising your individual gifting. Just at the moment, we're involved in leading the families ministry in our church. That came out of some brokenness that happened, and we have a clear vision as to what should be happening through that. And it's really exciting seeing the changes and the transformation that have begun through our church family. So we're working together on that common vision that draws us together and teaches us through the tough times and the good times to rely on God. And we find we pull him into the centre of our relationship through this.
Now, what we're not saying is add something else to already busy diary. This isn't about being out at church activities every night of the week. But this is finding the thing that you can do together. And we're going to explore more about how that fits in having a vision for our marriages tomorrow. But it might be we have complementary gifts. We run a mission-shaped community that is focused on reaching out to families. And the people that are involved in that lead our marriage work from our church are completely different. She is an upfront speaker, she's very organised, she's a great communicator, she's an extrovert. She's married to a lovely guy who is an introvert, but he is brilliant at tech, at IT, at all those different things. He's a great cook. And together, this works brilliantly as they run this marriage ministry. So it's not finding things necessarily that you have in common, but how these can complement each other, and asking the Lord where you can serve. And our experience, our testimony is that has been, again, a foundation for our marriage. It's drawn us together and has drawn us to him. So what we want you to do now, just for a couple more minutes, think about the three things we've talked about: praying together, building accountable friendships, and serving together. And just share one thing with your husband or wife that's maybe struck you from those things, and then we'll come back together. Come back together now. Try and think if there's one practical thing maybe that you could do next week out of those things. That would be brilliant. So we're going to look now what we think is a really exciting discovery that we made a number of years ago. And this is the difference between our personalities and our spirituality. And we used to get those things confused, so we'll just unpack that now. But if we have a look in John 15, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says this. He says, "I am the vine, and you are the branches. If a man remains in me, and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." And this is this sense of being connected with the vine. We had the privilege of going with Care for the Family to do some speaking in South Africa last year. And we managed to tack on a little bit of holiday at the beginning, and we stayed in a vineyard. And we had a tour of the vineyard. And the guide told us that the fruit can stay, the grapes can stay on the vine for a very, very long time and still remain fruitful, still remain healthy, still remain good for use. And it's because they're connected with the vine, and the vine is connected into the good soil, the soil that gets the nutrients from it. And in a way, it's an obvious example, but it reinforces to us the need for us as individuals and as couples to remain connected in the vine. And that's the way that we'll be fruitful. That's the way that we'll be able to make good choices in a busy world. Jesus says 10 times in this passage, "Remain in me." And when he says something often, I think we need to pay attention. Now, a few years ago, we read a book by a guy called Gary Thomas, and it's called Sacred Pathways. Now, just put up a hand if you know about the love languages. I think most of you probably do. Different ways that we give and receive love. But this is similar, but this is how we each relate to God. And very often we'll find that we will be different in our marriage. The book is called Sacred Pathways. And it's a book that's actually written for individuals, but we've taken it and we've used it in the context of marriages. And we've been quite excited about the things that we have discovered. Now, we have discovered that we both connect with God in very different ways. But if we're not careful, we think our way to connect is the right way or the only way, and we think our husband or wife isn't really doing quite such a good job as we are because it looks different for them.
So, do you know what God looks like? Does your husband or wife know what God looks like? I love this little story that illustrates it. Imagine yourself in a primary school. The class is just sitting down. The teacher says, today, girls and boys, we're going to do some drawing. You can draw whatever you want to draw. So they all get their pencils out and their crayons and they start off. And as the art starts to appear on people's sheets, the teacher is passing among them, just seeing what they're doing and maybe correcting how they're holding their pencils. And she comes up to one little girl who's drawing away, concentrating hard, his tongue sticking up bit between the teeth, and says to her, Emily, what are you drawing? And she says, I'm drawing God, miss. Teacher pauses and says, but Emily, no one knows what God looks like. Emily, without missing a beat, looks at her and says, well, they will do in 5 minutes, won't they, miss?
It's a great story, isn't it? It's not one size fits all. And God is infinite, and He's made us in His image, so there are an infinite number of ways that we can each connect with God. But we're going to go through 6 now that we've pulled out from this book, and just see if you can, as we go through them, see if you can connect with them, see if you can realise where you fit into some of these categories, or it might be something completely different again for you. But the first one is through our relationships. This will be those of us who are more extrovert in nature. People who are extrovert find the easiest way to connect with God to be among others who are connecting with God as well. They're energized by being around other people. Being here this weekend will energize you. You might find it, if you're like this, you might find it more of a challenge to go to that quiet place on your own and to pray. But you love praying with others and in a group. Now, I relate to this. I love being with people and I love praying with other people. And since our children were really little, I have met with some other girls to pray. And we've done it at different times over the years, but just at the moment, and we meet on a Friday morning, every other Friday morning, just to pray. And I have to admit, we have coffee, we sometimes have a bit of breakfast, we have flapjacks maybe, and there's quite a lot of chat that goes on.
I would think if this was put to the advertising standards board, they would say prayer together was a misrepresentation. It is very much relationship together. And one day it was Catherine's birthday, I think, and I'd waited at home, having the day off work, and she was having this time with the girls. Now I, in personality style, are what you might be called a directive reformer. I like things to be done concisely, I like them to be done quickly, and then we can get on with what needs doing next. So this breakfast starts at 8 and it's meant to finish by 9, and by 10 o'clock I've been upstairs working away, and I thought, well, the day is nearly gone for our day out. So I'll pop down and just see what's going on, to find that the prayer hadn't yet started. They were still on chatting together. When I meet with guys, we know the list we're going to get through. It's going to be about our families and our work life and a bit about one or two other things, and we'll share it very quickly and we'll pray it through, and then we're gone. I meet with a guy every Friday morning. We start at 7:30, we finish at 8:15, we've had breakfast and prayer together and we're at work. Imagine coming downstairs while I'm still talking with more coffee being produced. The problem is I've had to recognise that that's what Catherine does. It's how she actually is part of her relationship and the way she connects to God. She will chat to God for hours in prayer when she gets going.
And so it's about understanding the differences. And for me, just meeting and chatting, that was just as much helpful for me in my spiritual walk as the sort of list of getting through the prayer things. Now, where this also goes wrong is I very easily talk to people about what's going on in my life. So if we were meeting with the couple that we talked about just now on a Tuesday evening, alternate Tuesday evening, I would know that there were things going on in my life and I would tell them about it. But I'd also know that there's stuff going on for Rich Richard, and he doesn't appear to be telling them. A little confusing, so I think, well, I'll just do it for him.
Bad move.
So again, it's been about respecting each other's way of doing that, and me acknowledging that for him, maybe that wasn't the time to share those things, and it certainly wasn't my job to do it. So that's the first one, that's through relationship.
Then secondly, intellectual thought. People who have this way of relating to God will tend to see things through their minds. They'll engage, or need to engage, by carrying out perhaps more serious study of what's going on. So it's more with the mind than the heart. They may open the Bible and they'll open a commentary by the side so that they can begin to understand what's there. Or in modern parlance, they'll be on and off the internet looking for things that maybe expand the story that they're reading. They study better to know God better. The two are linked. They love the world of ideas and concepts. Faith for them is something to be understood as much as to be experienced. If they aren't learning as they go along, they're not growing in their minds. They need to know more and more, otherwise they begin to feel stagnant in their faith. We can find examples of this in the Bible. In Scripture, it says various things about people's personality for us when we go looking for it. Moses blessed the tribe of Levi, and he said about the Levites, they will teach your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel. A whole group of people pulled out for the idea of teaching. Solomon, we know through his wisdom literature, showed God using that intellect to glorify God. Much of the book of Proverbs stresses how important an informed mind is in actually getting to know God. In Romans, Paul talks about the importance of renewing our minds. If you study Paul's letters, you can't with any seriousness think he wasn't other than someone who had a vigorous intellectual grasp of his faith and journey with God. And so for those who connect with God in this way, they feel closest to him when they are reading things that stimulate that mind. It brings them a fresh understanding of God and leads them forward. Now, whilst Pat and I both love reading, you'll have got a little bit of an inclination from the last section we looked at, that she would have a different group of books that she might like to read. They'd be ones based around relationship with God, based around people's experiences of that journey with God. Whereas I'll tend to like reading, say, a biography of someone like Luther, or Charles Simeon, or John Wesley, or Isaac Newton, because I love the stories about how they overcame the challenges in their lives and grew closer to God through their pursuit of Him.
And what we used to do, we didn't used to value each other's reading materials. I'd be reading a book about relationships or about the prophetic or about prayer, and I think Richard needs to hear this. So I would read him a chunk of my book, normally at 11 o'clock at night. And then he would come back with his great tome of a biography, and he would read me bits out of that. And we didn't really appreciate it. It didn't really go down well, particularly not late at night. And again, it's been understanding that the way we choose to engage our minds is different. Now, Richard belongs to, or used to belong to, a men's group. And again, in the early days, I was quite critical of this group. Partly because we have 4 children, they were little at the time, and I resented the time that he was out of the house. And as far as I was concerned, this group was really academic. And they just didn't really talk about anything that was, in my view, any use at all for Monday morning. But again, I've had to acknowledge that and realise that whilst that wasn't my preferred way, it was really enriching for Richard, for his walk with God. And I've had to change my tune on that one.
So the next section we'll look at is service. We talked about this a little bit through the introduction. Those who love serving love God by loving others. It's quite simple, really, isn't it? And they stand out around us. When we look around our church life, we'll see the ones who love serving. Kath and I have led marriage and parenting groups for years and years now. At the end of that time together, you'll find me stacking the chairs, doing the washing up, hoovering the floor. You'll find Catherine standing by the door, having a long chat to someone about something. Sort of pastoral side to her. The Bible challenges us to love God by loving others, doesn't it? James talks about pure and faultless religion is looking after orphans and widows in their distress. We just had quite a funny example of that. Catherine mentioned her mother has broken her hip and is recovering from that, and we asked a friend of ours in our Mission Shape community if she could recommend someone to do some physiotherapy with her. She said, I'll go do it. She's a physiotherapist. And she saw Catherine's mum, and Catherine's mum said, no, I've got to pay you. And she said, no, Scripture teaches us to love the orphans and the widows, having just lost her husband at Christmas. And my mother-in-law, who's actually a vicar, sort of took stock for a moment of this. But it's a wonderful outworking of someone saying and then doing things. We have many examples of that each of us will have in our lives. So service is the way that some of us express our faith. Now the problem comes when we assume that that's what our husband or wife wants to do. And I have found over the years, and I do confess I keep forgetting this, that it's not a good idea when the vicar stands at the front of the church and says he wants someone to go on the cleaning rota to volunteer your wife. Our expression of faith. Or to cook meals for the overseas visitors who are coming into the church. Or put her onto the coffee rota. As much as I like doing it, it's not something that she would want to necessarily do with me.
So last time he volunteered me to cook something, I showed him the kitchen. So this is how you do it. And actually Richard is a really good cook, so that was fine. But again, it's understanding where we're each coming from, honouring each other and cheering each other on in that respect. Okay, so the next one, contemplation. So this is different again. So while others are booking up meetings or looking for opportunities to connect with others, these people love God in quiet pursuit. They love being in His presence. They carefully guard their diaries and they can't bear to be busy. So the whole theme of busyness they will find really difficult. Now one of the best descriptions of a contemplative is when Moses is blessing the tribe of Benjamin in Numbers, and it says this: let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in Him, for He shields him all day long, and the one the Lord loves rests between His shoulders. Beautiful description of someone just spending that time in God's presence. And Gary Thomas describes them like this: contemplatives simply want to bathe in the ocean of love that God has for His children, while the rest of us seem unfortunately content to experience that love drop by drop. Now we have a friend who sees this as their primary way of connecting with God. He is an artist, and he loves nothing better than going away for a whole week on his own, just spending time in God's presence. Now he's married with children. His wife is actually a surgeon, so she's incredibly busy, but she makes it a priority in the year to enable him to go away by himself for that week. It means she has to do all the stuff with the kids and manage things in the home, but she knows how important it is for him and for his work and for his health, his spiritual health, to do that, and she makes it happen. So if you are married to someone who is a contemplative, see how you can help them manage your diary together so you have that time. Now, I have discovered that the busier I get, the more important this is for me. We have a place that we can go to in Wales, and when life is busy, that is my place of retreat. That's the place I know that I am going to be fed spiritually. But then there's a tension, because if I go there, I'm not with Richard, and so then we're trying to do the time together as well. So it's a tension we have to manage, but it's worth paying attention to it if that's how you are wired. And then another C, the next one is creation. Now, these people feel closest to God in the great outdoors, when they're surrounded by nature. So whether you're walking in the woods, whether you're on a beach, in the mountains, God speaks to you through creation. Maybe you live in the centre of London, but you can still look up to the sky, you can see a rainbow, you can see a beautiful sunset, whatever it is. Gary Thomas says this: if you feel like your time in front of books or listening to sermons has become stagnant, grab a coat, pick up a walking stick and step outside. into a school that never closes. The beauty of creation. And there's so much in the Bible about nature and about God speaking to us through creation. And sometimes it's when we're actually in that environment that we understand their meaning more. Several years ago now, we had an incredible experience. We were really privileged to be able to go to the Grand Canyon. And we went with our kids and we actually went whitewater rafting down the Grand Canyon for a week. There's several occasions I thought my last moment had come. But at night, you looked up, the canyon is just incredibly beautiful, big, majestic, but we looked up at the sky and there were no street lights, no artificial lights. I have never, ever seen so many stars. Now Richard, being a little nerdy, had brought this constellation map, so we got it out to try and look at these stars and work out which ones there were. There were so many, it didn't make sense. And there's that lovely little verse in Genesis, just throwaway lines, and God also made the stars, just as an afterthought. And there they were. So for me, that was an incredible way of connecting with God.
So if your spouse works best, connects with God best through creation, then think of the ways that you can work together on that to create more time for them to spend. Think about where you live, how you live, time you spend together, and how you're going to carve out that time for them.
And then the last one that we're looking at is through worship. And these people naturally celebrate the glory of God through worship and through celebration. And if you think about the Old Testament, there's an amazing background of celebration through all the different festivals. The Feast of the Tabernacles lasted for 7 whole days. David danced before the Ark of the Covenant. There were singers, there were musicians. It was a great, great party. And I think David would have been part of this. When he wrote the Psalms, that's revealing his heart. He connected with God through worship. Gary Thomas describes these people as cheerleaders for God. Now, I don't know if you've been watching the Winter Olympics, but the sight of those guys in the downhill skiing, just whizzing down the mountain, that's what it feels like for people who connect with God through worship. And isn't it great to have these guys leading us in worship this weekend? Now, this is me. I love playing worship CDs. I work in Cardiff and we live in Bristol, so I have a lovely time in the mornings. I just put on my worship CDs all the way to Cardiff and all the way back. And this isn't Richard's way at all. So again, we had a little incident over this. When we were first married, we had a car that had a CD player in the boot. So you had to decide before you went on your journey what music you were going to listen to. We were going away for a weekend for our wedding anniversary. And I loaded it up with lovely worship CDs. I think I even put a talk in there. So it was going to be great. Have these on all the way in the car on the journey. So we start off. And I turn on the engine, press play, and on comes Bruce Springsteen. Followed by Queen, followed by Elton John. And Richard had seen my choice of music, chucked it all out, and do you know, I honestly thought that he probably wasn't a Christian at that time. Again, we're just different.
She thinks that quite frequently, actually. I love the way she uses pejorative language to get all the emotion on her side of that. So how bad. Anyway, we've given you 6 of the different expressions of relationship with God that Gary Thomas uses in his book. Just a little word of caution, the book isn't about the marriage relationship and how you work together. We sort of link that through from the different ones he's done. But there's many more that he explores, and you can perhaps think about it yourselves, how best you connect. We're now going to come to the third exercise in your books, which is a little bit longer. We're going to go for about 10 minutes. Kath will introduce it.
Okay. Well, it's actually on the thing, but see if you can think of some specific occasions on your own when you have felt close to God, and write them down. And then turn over the page after you've done that. Then see if you can work out what your ways would be. They call it your spiritual pocket, but what are the ways for you that best connect? Think what your ones are for your spouse, and then have a little chat about it together. We're going to give you 10 minutes. We're going to put a bit of music on, I think, for that. And then we'll draw it together, and then we'll go for
a very quick and a very brief journey through Gary Thomas's book, Sacred Pathways. It is quite a tome, so those of you that are nerdy might like to have a look at it first. It is evident that Catherine, when she's working on this with me, has pulled out more relationship ones. There's far more in there about the intellectual disciplines that might assist. I also just want to defend myself with Bruce Springsteen. I think it's a much better driving song than maybe, wave your hands in the air and clap or something. So probably going to lead to an accident, So let's just leave you with, first of all, a little picture about what a marriage where you're working together and adapting to each other's styles could look like, and then Catherine will just do a summary. Now, in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, there's a National Trust property called Castle Ward. And that property was built by the Viscount of Bangor and his wife. The Viscount's called Bernard Ward and his wife was called Anne. And they had very different styles. The thing about this property is that the Viscount loved Gothic and Anne loved classical. So they could have built one house or the other, but they chose not to. And the different facades of the house reflect each of their positions. One side is Gothic, the other side is classical. And inside, they actually have treated the house the same. Isn't that a wonderful visual image of how two people can work together? And for them, they created something of beauty. For other people, they may or may not agree with that, but that was the home they built together. And we can see that with our spirituality. When a couple look at your family, they may go, what a mess of spirituality. But you think it was beautiful because it's what you built together on your journey together. And guys, it doesn't matter what someone else thinks, because at the end of the day, it's not between you and them. It's between you and God as to what you build.
So let's not confuse spirituality with personality. This is about getting the best, making the best of who we are, but also cheering our husband or wife on in who they are. And there was a third little bit you may not have got to in the time we had that talks about finding 3 ways where you can support your husband or wife in their relationship with God. So do carry on that conversation over the next few hours, the week ahead, and ask each other, show each other how you can help be cheerleaders for each other in our relationship with God. Now, you'll need these for tomorrow, so if you put them with your other programme, that would be great. So we've looked at some ways, haven't we, of how we can best build our spiritual life together. We've looked at praying together. We've looked at finding those accountable friendships. We've looked at serving together. And we've looked at how, in our personality, we best connect with God. What our spiritual pathway is and how we can encourage each other in that. And as we said, that's not exhaustive. There are an infinite number of ways that we can do that. Now, we used to think that as we came close to God, He would help us draw close to each other, and that is true. God helps us build our marriage together. But what we've discovered is it's also the other way around. As we invest in our marriage relationship, as we come together to God, as we look to each other to encourage each other in our spiritual walk, then He draws us to Him as well. And we together can then build that better relationship with Him. We can be that cord of 3 strands that's not quickly broken. That cord of 3 strands that holds us together, but also can reach out to others as well and display something of His image to the world. Shall we just close by praying together? Father God, just thank you so much for each couple here today. We thank you that we are each beautifully and wonderfully made. Thank you that you have your ways, that you have created us to draw close to you, and help us to enjoy that discovery together. Help us together to be in step and look to you, and to see you working in us and through us. And we give you the glory. In Jesus' name. Amen.
And we are going to now touch the subject which everybody but one in here is concerned about. And I'm sure that one person has occasional problems with busyness. But yeah, okay, so what we're going to do first, because so many of you, 99% of you said it was a problem, we're going to ask God to make a difference. So we're going to start by praying. And what I want you to do is to pray with your spouse. We'll give you just for a minute, just pray that God really speaks to your hearts as individuals and as a couple. And because you need to change. If you want to do the things we talked about yesterday, have time for God, more time for God, more time for your spouse, more time for your family, something else has to change, or you won't have more time. And if you want to change, that's really difficult. Any like a New Year's resolution, isn't it? You can't do it on your own until the 5th of January. After that, it's gone. The Holy Spirit can make the difference. So what we want you to do is just pray with your spouse, ask the Holy Spirit to open your heart and tell you what you need to do as we talk. And some of these things will be applicable to you, some may not be, but listen to the things that the Holy Spirit says to you today. Okay, so just 1 minute then to just pray with your spouse and then we'll carry on.
Here in Ecclesiastes, there is a time for everything. I'm going to read the scripture, and hopefully we'll have some pictures to accompany it. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to mend. A time to be silent, and a time to speak, a time to love. We're back to this Slido again. Get your phones out. This time you need event code U479. Is that correct, Mike? Is that what it says on your thing this time?
Yep.
We are making sure that you get the right thing. And there are 3 questions that are going to be there. Do you want me to put them up first?
Yes. Absolutely.
The first one is, do you feel you have time to do the things you considered important to you? Do you think that your spouse is too busy?